All right, good morning, Doug. We're back with questions from our paid subscribers to Crisis Investing and members of FILE, our private membership group. So, first question, Doug, is with the dollar bound to hyperinflate or lose massive value, will America, who is a non-homogeneous country, be able to hold together?
Yeah, that is the $64 question. And look, for many years at this point, actually at this point it is many years, I've been saying that it's inevitable that not only the US, but most of the countries in the world are going to break up. And it used to be that the US had a common culture, a common ethnicity, common religion, kind of more or less anyway, all of these things. This is definitely no longer the case. And and in the past, at least it was reasonably financially stable economically. None of this is true anymore. So yeah, just like most of the countries in Africa are going to fly apart and break up, and I think it's going to happen to most of the countries in South America. And we've seen this happen in Europe with the breakup of Yugoslavia and separation of Czechoslovakia and, of course, the Soviet Union. Yeah, of course it's going to happen. I just hope it's not violent, but it probably will be violent because, there are lots of powers that want to keep the US together as a political entity, which makes no sense for many reasons at this point. So that's my opinion. What do you think?
Well, I just rely on your judgment on this one. I mean, it makes sense. I mean, it seemed, I certainly grew up thinking that it was a permanent fixture. The United States is the US. It's, can't be anything other than what it is, a whole unit. But regionally, obviously, there's a lot of differences. But, it's to me, it's even like on a very local level, a lot of people in the US don't even know who their neighbors are. I mean, so there's like, it's already such a fragmented place. So when you add a lot of stress to that, you can imagine chaos coming out of it.
Yeah. And the fact is that there's no reason why young Chicano males in California are going to want to foot the bill for old white broads in Massachusetts on their Social Security and Medicare. And they won't. I mean, that's one of many, many factors that,
Right. Yeah, next question is, I often wonder why the US has no civil defense anymore. I remember civil defense shelters when I was a kid and civilians ran drills. Does Doug have any philosophical perspectives on whether we should bring this back? I've heard we shouldn't have radiation shelters because it would make us more likely to push the button. Why have our citizens so unprepared?
well, I don't think it's an important thing anymore because, look, when everybody had, or lots and lots of people had bomb shelters in the 50s and 60s, uh, nuclear weapons had not evolved. They were dirtier than they are today. So it seemed like it was more important. And anyway, nuclear weapons uh, are just part of the military picture now. I think biological weapons are actually the major threat, and nobody really talks about them. Although it would seem with bioweapons labs apparently everywhere, including the Ukraine of all places, that the US was running them. We don't hear enough about that, but that's been disclosed. Uh, and in China and Russia, everybody's got a bioweapons lab. So I think biological war, for many reasons, is the way to fly in the future. Not big, dirty, stupid nuclear weapons, and of course, cyber weapons. Since the whole world, I mean, we're not running on farms anymore and doing things by hand. Everything's done by computer, and if cyber weapons disable utilities, it's game over.
Yep.
So So I think that's the answer. That's why you don't need a full fallout shelter anymore. Better to have a safe room for when the roving mobs are attacking you, and a fallout shelter won't help you You need a safe room more than a fallout shelter.
That's a good point. Okay. Um, Doug, what do you make of the gold silver ratio being over 100? And what do you think is causing this present disconnect? And do you think it'll ever get back down to the historical 10 to 20?
You know, it's funny. Uh, it used to be when, of course, we all know that initially the US government at the founding fixed a gold silver ratio at around 17 and a half to 1 or whatever it was. And a lot of people thought that this was like a feature of the cosmic firmament. And there was a whole class of evangelistic silver promoters that were beating the drum for silver. One of them, I understand, I was told the other day, a chap named Ted Butler. Did you ever hear him?
Oh yeah, yeah.
He's dead. He died a month ago, somebody told me.
Really, I didn't. Oh, too
Yeah,
bad.
I haven't confirmed it, but I was told that from what seemed like a reliable source.
Hmm.
Anyway, uh, there were a lot of silver letters and silver promotion and all this type of thing. Uh, the fact is that the ratios between different commodities changes all the time for technological reasons. I'm a silver bull, quite frankly, for lots of reasons we can go into about the fundamentals of silver. Uh, but the fact that it's 100 to 1 tells me that, yeah, it's probably relatively cheap relative to gold. And I think it's going higher. So I like silver a lot. But
But isn't it one of the I think most challenging things to consider about silver now? Because most people think of it as a well, historically, you think of it as a monetary metal in the context of the 17 and a half to 1, or whatever, and or what was it? William Jennings Bryant was, advocating for, the bimetal stuff and bringing the silver back in at a fixed rate.
you wanted to use it to inflate the currency, actually.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. But that those are all based upon it as a monetary metal, and it's in the last, I don't know how many years it's been, but certainly you say in the last decade, it's becoming, its industrial uses vastly supersedes, I think, its monetary use. Don't you think?
Yes, yes, it does. In addition to the fact that from a production point of view, most silver is a relatively trivial byproduct of copper mines and lead mines and zinc mines. So uh, I'm all for silver, but you can't hang your hat on a particular element that doesn't have. You can hang your hat on uranium if you like nuclear power, but even then, from everything I can determine, and I'm not a nuclear physicist, thorium would have been and should have been a better power source than uranium. We
And
only use uranium in
China
reactors, yeah, because it can be easily turned into weapons, which it's harder to do with thorium. So,
and China has an active thorium reactor right now.
do they?
They do.
Uh, well, it's
So they're
smart.
pretty much going. I mean, it's just a test, but it's running. And I think they'll do a lot more of it because there's apparently thorium is everywhere, right?
Yeah, it's much more available than uranium is. So, and there are many other advantages to thorium, except it's not as easy to turn into a nuclear weapon, which is why we use uranium in reactors because of the bomb program.
Yeah, I heard it was like the national security state thought it would be better if we used uranium because it would obscure how much of it was being going into weapons production.
Mhm. Yeah, all kinds of reasons. National security state creating insecurity for
Everybody.
100 years now.
All right, this guy says, I have gold, silver, palladium, as well as some miners. I also have a large portion of my portfolio sitting in dollars. What would be better fiat? What would be a better fiat currency to keep cash in, and how best to do so? Invesco has a currency ETF that gives exposure to 6 other currencies, including euro, Swiss franc, Canadian dollar, and yen.
Yeah, The way I see it, the only reason to keep currency, any or all these fiat currencies, is because they're used in transactions, as a matter of fact. So that's why you keep them. But owning an ETF like that is speculating that these other currencies will do better than the dollar. Well, maybe the Swiss franc will, or will continue to, maybe, but I don't know about the others. So no, I don't see the point, frankly.
What's the alternative if you want to have cash, if you want to have cash on the sidelines? I guess short-term treasuries or the
I think
Sprott Gold
that
ETF or something like that.
I think that's the answer. It's short-term treasuries because sure, it's being inflated away, but the interest rates on them will assuage the damage to probably the greatest and safest extent possible. Yeah, I'd say instead of playing around with these foreign currencies, uh, I would just get into a money market fund that invests in short-term T-bills. That's probably the simplest and the best answer, I think.
Yeah, like when they say Buffett has $360 billion of cash, he doesn't have dollars. He probably has short-term T-bills.
Yeah, yeah, that's basically what it is, short-term T-bills. Because the US government is probably never going to default on them. So at least you'll get your dollars back.
Okay, next question. The guy says, I'm 67, my wife is 65, and our only child is a young man of 24. We're planning an extended trip this summer to explore retirement in the Mediterranean. My son will be exploring job opportunities in the field of GIS, it says. So I don't know what that is.
What is GIS?
I, maybe, maybe, maybe it's a typo and he means gas, like gas and oil. I'm not sure. But anyway, yeah, I'm not sure. Typo. He says, all three of us are permanent residents of New Zealand. Where do you think the future is brightest for us retiring on my son starting his new career? New Zealand or the Mediterranean or even Uruguay?
Well, I think if you want to work, Uruguay is not a particularly good choice. Uh, I like New Zealand. Look, I lived there for years, and I just like New Zealand. It's a real hands-on place with a lot of farmers and guys that work with machines with their hands and stuff like that. It's a good choice. As far as the Southern Mediterranean, listen, it would help if you spoke Spanish or Italian or Greek, whatever you're thinking of. New Zealand sounds to me like the best deal with the terribly limited information that you're putting forward.
Yeah, the typo hurts because the career prospects are the big thing, right? Where could the kid have the best economic opportunity? Yeah, that's the question.
Anyway, you should, if you've got extra capital, he ought to be doing what your son Max is doing and take the preparation.
All right, so let's see. What does Doug think the impact will be on markets, gold, and the dollar if there's a shooting war between China and Taiwan, assuming the U.S. supports Taiwan?
Well, here's an opinion. I don't think there's going to be a shooting war between them. In fact, I was talking with a friend of mine, an Australian who travels a lot, and he recently spent some time, actually in both Korea and in Taiwan. But what he said is, as far as he's concerned, from observing things in Taiwan, that the Chinese are kind of taking it over uh, with immigration. It's like it's being absorbed by mainland Chinese moving there.
Hmm.
So he thinks that there's not going to be a war because they're going to take it over by demographics. Well, okay, that's reasonable. I don't think there's going to be a war because it's not going to serve any useful purpose to destroy all that capital. And the big X factor is, will the US get involved? My feeling is it's idiotic to get involved with China and Taiwan. about as idiotic as it is to get involved with Russia and the Ukraine. But wait a minute. Maybe maybe China or Russia should get involved if we take over Greenland or uh, take over Panama. That's this
Yeah,
is
they
big
might.
countries take over little countries all the time. So I think it'll happen gradually. It's not going to be a war in Taiwan. That's what I think.
Okay. Let's see. Is it wise to largely or even completely convert the cash portion of one's portfolio into precious metals? And how high do you judge the risk of confiscation? And if one does keep one's cash in US dollars, is there an economical way to hedge over time?
Well, if you'd asked me about that a couple years ago, I would have told you what I'm going to tell you now. Yeah, you should have a lot of gold because gold was really cheap relative to everything else. Now it's not cheap relative to everything else. That's not to say that it's still not going to 30,000 an ounce or whatever is the case you made in those recent articles you wrote.
Is it
It's different. It's just a different kind of speculation than it was back then.
right? And I think, if you have cash, if you say if the cash portion of one's portfolio he's talking about in particular, well, one of the easy things to do, what I've done with some is I bought the Sprott physical gold ETF rather than holding more in dollars in my brokerage account, you know? So I'm using it as my cash, my savings. Just I'm considering gold my just traditional savings, but using the ETF for it for money that would normally be in cash in my brokerage account. That's the way I've done it.
Yeah. And of course, you want a lot of gold in your physical possession, but at some point there's hopefully enough of it that it's inconvenient to keep it all in your physical possession. So, yeah,
Okay. Oh, and what do you think of the risk of confiscation of gold confiscation in the future?
I think it's relatively low. And the reason I say that is that when the US government stole all that gold from Americans in 1933, it was in widespread circulation. So there was a lot of gold. And they say, we don't know anything, that all of the gold in Fort Knox is melted down coins that they stole from Americans back then. It's not good delivery bars. So will they do it again? I think that so few Americans own gold at this point that it's probably not worth the trouble.
Yeah, I mean the only big pot of it that's there is the GLD ETF, right? That they could take. If they're going to take anything, they would just cash everyone out of it and take that first.
Anything's possible depending on who's in office and what kind of harebrained scheme they've been talked to. Who knows is the answer to that question. I think the odds are somewhat lower today. Uh, I mean, listen, once again, I'm of the personal opinion that all of these fiat currencies are going to dry up and blow away. And you need money, and it's just intelligent to use gold as money. It really is the best money available. Bitcoin's turning out to be, I think that's an alternative, but I don't think it'll happen. But how can you predict what these abnormal psychologies that get into government will do?
Yeah. Wondering what the odds of a windfall profit tax on gold and gold mining capital gains in America could be.
Gold goes to 30,000. We know what's going to happen to the gold stocks. Yeah, they did. They were talking about, I don't know if they ever did a windfall profits tax on oil back when oil was a big deal 40 years ago, but they were talking about it. And of course, then a windfall profits tax would have just been out of envy. Can't have these people making all this money. But now the government is bankrupt and desperate. So maybe they'd like that. Listen, it's unpredictable what the government will do. we're dealing with we're dealing with sociopathic characters that populate the government of necessity.
They did do a windfall profits tax in 1980 targeting oil companies.
Hmm.
Yeah. So it
Okay.
wasn't
Yeah.
individuals, but it was the companies.
Right. Well, they can and often do anything that they want. Just look throughout history and see what governments do to the people. I mean, look, the number one, the prime directive of all living things, whether we're talking amoebas or corporations or governments or anything, is survive. And the US government will do anything it needs, thinks it needs to do to survive as an entity. That's true of, like I said, all living entities, including governments. So anything's possible. You just
Uh,
got to insulate yourself from these people and figure, yeah, it's a possibility.
yep. I think anything's on the table. We're entering an era of, we talked about it before we start recording, lawlessness, but it's like lawlessness, all the norms are being violated. And it's not
Mhm.
just not new with Trump, it's something that preceded him, the trend, but it is accelerating and it's all falling of the legal law is a fiction and the lawmakers can do what they want.
Yeah. And if the ship goes down, I mean, okay, maybe there's going to be some lifeboats and maybe women and children first, but maybe not. So it's kind of every man for himself.
Absolutely. Let's see. Doug, have you ever met Jose Mujica? Who was the
No,
former
yeah,
president?
former, yeah, president of Uruguay, ex-communist revolutionary from back in the 60s. No, never have. But he impresses me as a character cut from the same mold as Bergoglio, the Pope that's just died, actually.
Hmm.
Yeah, serious communist, serious statist, but you know, not particularly violent. And I don't know. What have you heard about what's his name, Mujica?
Just just the impression I've heard is that he's not doesn't appear to be corrupt because he basically lives in poverty, you know,
Yeah,
and is kind of encouraged within the Uruguayan political sphere, like cooperation, peaceful, between the different parties. Never you can be in opposing parties, but don't take it that seriously, So I think that's been good. And I heard somebody told me that they thought, because he's in poor health now and, they think he's going to pass away soon, that somebody told me that they thought he was going to come out and do a last speech where he was going to sort of denounce these socialistic ideas.
interesting. Well, I think as people get older, they usually do mellow and they're not as radical. So that kind of makes sense.
Yeah. It'd be awesome if he did that.
It would be nice, yes.
I don't expect it. Okay, Doug, at what point is it time to get out of gold?
Well, uh, I, once again, I hate to retro rock too much, but I've said for many years, you'll know when Slime and Newspeak, assuming they still exist as magazines, carry a picture of a golden bull tearing apart the New York Stock Exchange on their cover. That will be the bell ringing. But right now, nobody even cares about gold. It's not in the news, nobody cares. So this is not the time to sell for a lot of reasons. And the time to sell will be when you see that magazine cover, like I've just said. At that point, even though gold is for savings, yeah, you can flip everything and put it into the stock market.
Right. Because by then the stock market will have declined probably quite a bit. I mean, Bonner always talks about the, Dow gold ratio, right?
Yeah,
You can buy the
yeah,
Dow for an ounce of gold or 3 ounces of gold or whatever it is.
yeah, and it makes sense. It makes sense.
Okay. I know a lot of people have been scared lately when, this gold got up to 3,500 and then came back and they're like, oh, should we just sell? It's so funny. actually. It's
Yeah,
funny. We would literally went from 6 months ago, everybody being very disappointed in gold, to now people wondering if it's the top. That's how fast that happened.
they shouldn't be treating it as a speculation. They should be treating it as an asset for savings. They're viewing it the wrong way.
Okay. What's the best investment approach to capitalize on the Brazilian stock market? Is there a good
Well,
ETF that you?
yeah, there are, but I don't pay attention to them. I'm not following Brazil. Maybe we should because we're right next door. You were just up in Brazil last week.
I was, but I wasn't looking at the stock market. But let's see. Uh, I don't know how it's even been doing. I feel like I should know better about the Latin American exchanges, how the markets are doing down here, but I just don't pay any attention. I'll have to
Yeah,
look.
you're right. You're right.
It's a big mistake. Um, all right. So,
Well, the thing is that I'd like to think that I'll pay attention if there's some major catastrophe of some type in one of these countries and the stock market just falls out of bed, then it's worth looking at as a speculation. But are any of these countries down here, except for Argentina, going to grow predictably? And Argentina should grow predictably if Milei's programs continue to be put into effect and his party wins the midterm elections and stuff like that. But no other country down here is predictable, I don't think. And Uruguay doesn't have a stock market. I don't know. They got a place where bonds are traded, but there's no stock market here.
the year to date, apparently, the Brazilian stock market is up 2%, and it was down 10% last year, but up 22% the year before. So I guess as a play on commodities, maybe. Yeah, I
Yeah,
guess.
commodities, right. I would uh, I would prefer I'd prefer to bet on Argentina because things might have actually changed down here in Argentina. But
Right. Okay. Let's see. It's kind of an odd question. He says, as a non-US citizen or resident, why would I continue to hold US dollar denominated instruments and risk currency depreciation, which is already happening, and currency controls that may prevent me from repatriating my capital?
hmm,
I mean, basically, the position a Russian oligarch found themselves in, or maybe in the future, Chinese citizens might find themselves in.
yeah, that's right. So how much in the way of US dollar assets is he talking about? If it's many millions, that's a different question from just X number of thousands for convenience.
Yeah, I mean, that risk, this bifurcation of the world and, with us or against us, that's now mostly focused on security and trade it's going to pass over, it's going to evolve into capital markets, you have to imagine, if they keep pushing
Yeah,
it this way.
and I think we will get foreign exchange controls of some description in the US. And this is another argument why you should be diversified politically in addition to geographically. Not just diversify between investments, but don't have all your money in one country under the control of one government. That's the answer to the question, I think, as I understand it, really.
Yeah. As a libertarian, don't the Trump's administration look more and more like a bunch of flat earthers when it comes to economics and peace?
Yes, yes, they do. I mean, their tariff policy is not a policy. It's like Trump thinking whatever is a good idea at the time. And the same with his foreign policy. You got to separate these things. I mean, Doge is wonderful. I hope they pull that off and basically fire most of the US government. That's wonderful. And deregulating, wonderful. Okay. But as far as his foreign policy, I don't know if he has a policy, quite frankly. It's whatever seems like a good idea at the time. And and of course he's using tariffs as a weapon, so that's part of the foreign policy as much as domestic policy.
Yeah, it seems like he's got loyalties and interests, but no philosophy or principles at all, you know?
No central principles or philosophy at all, which makes them unpredictable. It's like dealing with a kid.
My kids are way more predictable than he is, but Doug, what's your take on the impact of China standing its ground, at least so far, on the tariffs, and how you think it might impact the makeup and growth of the BRICS plus trading bloc?
Oh yeah. Well, this is first of all, I don't think the BRICS as a trading bloc is a real thing. It's just a bunch of countries that have nothing in common with each other. Nothing. It's like the United Nations. It's meaningless. Yeah, the United Nations. But these are all people with vastly divergent interests and so forth. The only interest the BRICS have is that they see the US as a danger and an enemy, especially with the currency. So forget about the BRICS. It's just kind of like this is what we call all the countries out there that are suspicious of the US. That's all the BRICS are. And they're not going to have a currency or anything like that. Forget about it. Um, so what's the question?
Well,
Uh,
just that it's just like the impact of China standing its ground on
Oh,
tariffs.
oh yeah, what's going to happen between China and the US with tariffs? Well, look, we're dealing with sociopaths, so that makes them a little bit unpredictable, or maybe even predictable that they'll do something stupid, uh, like like the Indian and the Pakistani governments, which are looking like they're going to have another war. Well, we're dealing with sociopaths. Sure, they'll do something stupid, but if cooler heads in the U.S. and China prevail, neither one of them are going to want to lose face or seem like they're backing down. But hopefully they can de-escalate this. But maybe not, because Trump has made such a big deal. I've got to have tariffs, tariffs are the way. I don't know. I hope they de-escalate them instead of, each of them shooting each other, not just in the foot, but shooting each other through the heart.
Right. I mean, if Trump's plan is to reindustrialize America, to make America great again, uh, it is vastly easier to imagine he could accomplish that if we were still trading with China in the meantime, because we need the stuff that they have today in order to rebuild manufacturing in the US. So
Yeah.
if
In
that's the
other words,
goal,
we can't change the US into, reorient the nature of our factories and everything. Can't do that overnight. It's like saying Zimbabwe could do it overnight. You need machine tools and expertise and capital to do that. So no, it'll
just
take.
like China needed that stuff from us to get where it's gotten, and we have basically just let it compound the capital and knowledge and infrastructure there for the last 3 decades. We have lost it here, and if you want to get it back, we've got to we need it, some of it from them. We
Yeah,
need to
yeah.
tooling. We need stuff from them to make it happen fast.
It's like Trump thinks that the US will blossom again if we destroy China. They're our problem. No, the enemy is ourselves, not China.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Next question is, I know you officially recommend the Casey free ride, which is essentially after a stock doubles, you sell half, and so you're don't have any more risk capital on the table, really. You're playing with house
Yeah.
money. He says, however, how does Doug play it with his gold and silver stocks that seem to be, as we all hope, right before a massive bull run? Are you de-risking by selling it at all at this point? Or are you above that Casey free ride threshold? How are you handling it?
Well, I'm uh what is that aphorism? Make a rule. Rule number one is make a rule. Rule number two is follow the rule. And like look, it's like with I don't want to sell anything right now because I think we are on the cusp of a real bull run. I mean, look, Trump has been talking recently, idiotically, I've got to say, about the U.S. government investing in mining companies or mining properties to get the mining business going. So I think mining in the U.S. and probably everywhere is going to start looking much more interesting. So I don't want to sell these things, frankly, but uh, I need to take money off the table from things that have gone up a lot just to buy into new deals. And don't forget that what I recommend you do and what I do, whatever possible, is buy companies that have warrants attached, which gives me optionality on them if I do have to sell the basic underlying stock. So,
Yep. It'd be great if you could buy every stock that way, but if you
yeah.
can, that's what you want to do.
Well, like this last company that we interviewed, the la the last private placement they did, which I didn't get involved in, was at twice the current market price. So I'm glad I didn't get involved in that private placement of them.
Yep. It was American Pacific Mining Corp. Is that one? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So
So
you can get a better deal buying it at market today than you could during the private placement.
yeah, exactly. And that is a company that has a very interesting story. But look, I expect the market on all of these things to take off. And when the wind blows, even the turkeys fly. Not that that one's a turkey, I don't think it is, but
All right, just a couple more questions for you, Doug. Kind of a fun one. If you could live in a book, what book would it be?
yeah. What book would it be? Would it be? Uh, Actually, if I was going to live in a book, I think that video and movies has replaced books rather vividly. So you got to pick a character that's living an ideal life, I think. And if I was going to pick a character that I like the way the character is and the way he lives and the way he deals with the current reality that he's got. I mean, it'd be great to be born in the year 2500 when hopefully everything is perfect and we got no worries, financial, economic, medical, political, it's like heaven on earth. That's possible, I think. But okay, pick a character. What from I'd pick that my favorite TV series of all time, notwithstanding Deadwood, which is no, I wouldn't want to live in that milieu, although that's probably my real favorite. Have Gun Will Travel, no question about it. Paladin has oriented his life to maximize everything around him. So yeah, that's what I would take.
Yeah, that's a good choice.
You got a choice?
I hadn't thought of one, but actually using him as an example, I need to think about it more, actually.
Yeah,
I
because
mean,
when we find Paladin, most of the time, he has a suite of rooms in the best hotel in San Francisco. Now, remember, this is 150 years ago, so it's not up to our current standards. But uh, we often find him reading a book or playing
newspaper.
chess in the lobby, and waiting for something interesting to draw his attention and solve a problem. That's an interesting life where he's escorts beautiful young lovelies to the opera, and then he goes out to solve problems in the hinterland for amusement and to refill his bank account. I mean, that's a pretty good life.
Yeah, that's a good one. All right, Doug. What are your most recent thoughts on Martin Armstrong's Socrates? Now that we all have a better understanding of how AI is, and possibly in this case has been changing the world.
Socrates. Told we didn't have any rapport, which I was rather surprised at because what I've read that he writes, he's a pretty sound libertarian. Uh, so I expect you to get along. But the Socrates, it's look, you can't rely on a computer that you programmed yourself. Phalanxes of computer experts and super gigantic computers. And what do you got? A laptop that you put some things in? I mean, nothing personal, and I don't mean to insult Armstrong, but to me, it's bullshit.
Okay. What made Hong Kong a success? And are there any good books that describe what made it a success?
Don't know if there's a book that does that. Uh, James Clavell wrote novels. He lived in Hong Kong, that are interesting, but that's not answering the question. Why was it a success? Well, that's pretty obvious, I think. It's that it was almost completely unregulated place, except that they had British common law where property rights were enforced. And it started out with nothing but absolutely poor and ignorant Chinese refugees. That was what Hong Kong was. And it was an atmosphere of freedom. That's what it was.
Hmm.
And internationally oriented atmosphere of freedom, unregulated, no, very, very low taxes. That's why Hong Kong became successful. Any place that follows the same formula will also be successful.
And yet no one does.
No, nobody does. No, it's too obvious. It's way too obvious.
Let's see. This question, I guess, it says, I read Miran's global reset paper along with Matt's theory that it'll push gold prices higher. I agree with that conclusion. He says, did you consider that crypto could also be used as the alternative currency to gold or a combination of both? Well, I'll say Miran mentions crypto in that paper as that he just mentions that it'd be this policy would be good for gold and good for crypto is the way he describes it. It doesn't differentiate between Bitcoin and crypto in general. I just don't think that the problem with Bitcoin being used as like a real reserve asset, the thing I see what's wrong with it is it doesn't have enough distribution among different trading partners. You know what I mean? Like we know that China has a ton of gold and we've got a ton of gold and Russia's got gold and a lot of central banks have some gold. So like, well, we have something that we all agree is the same that we could trade with. And since I think it's something like 90% of the Bitcoin is owned by a very small percentage of people, it's just hard to imagine how you get enough distribution of it so that it actually could be used, as that. But I don't
Oh,
know.
that's a good point. And the argument that's made for Bitcoin is that looking at the characteristics of a good money, which we've discussed here a number of times in the past, yeah, Bitcoin should and could work. But that's a big problem that you just brought up. And it's a new money. And when it comes to something as important as the money, people understandably and intelligently like tried and true and reliable. And Bitcoin is it's going to take a long time before it's really widely accepted. Although it's characteristic. Listen, I'm long Bitcoin, so I'm not opposed to it. I never
Yeah.
was.
Yeah, I mean, if the nation state were in the middle, you could imagine it more likely. If I was just trading with you, Doug, it'd be one thing. But if I'm in one country, most trade happens across international borders. I mean, the bulk of trade, right, is happening that way. And so in the nation state, is going to govern how money, what money it accepts, what money comes in and what money goes out, I just don't, it's just hard to imagine getting over that hump for where they would be willing to accept that. And, just because gold is the thing and everyone already has it. And they've already invested a lot in acquiring it, especially over the last 5 years.
Yeah, I remember a couple of years ago, our friend George Gammon uh, took a trip through South America, seeing if he could survive just by trading Bitcoin wherever he needed something. And it was pretty tough. It's not widely accepted enough at the moment.
Yep. Okay. Last question, Doug. The United Nations is very close to introducing taxes for global emissions, and they are initially targeting international shipping. This means they can bypass checks and balances to start to collect money from us to finance the World Economic Forum climate nonsense. And he actually links to an article where all the major nations, except for the US, basically agreed to do this, where they start taxing international shipping. It doesn't go into effect until 2027, but he says, what can we do about this? It feels like it's squeezing itself in behind the umbrella of noise about tariffs, Iran, and Tesla attacks, etc. Will currencies start to disappear and the slave economy be empowered? Carbon taxes will decide if you get to travel, if you eat steak. This is climate communism? And he said Howard Lutnick, Lee Zeldin, and Elon Musk were all previously big fans of climate taxes. And so he says, are they in place to usher in this nonsense?
Yeah, well, it's like Rosanna Dana said, if it's not one thing, it's something else. It's always something. And look, what you got to understand here is it's the institution of government itself that's the enemy. And it's pure coercion. And in a civilized society, you want to limit it. You want to limit coercion to the greatest degree possible. And so people are apatheticizing government when what they should be doing is trying to kill the beast. The enemy is government itself. It's not getting good people in government. That'll never happen. It'll always draw bad people because it's a coercive institution. So, eh, yeah, the question, as I understood it, is the climate nuts are the enemy. Well, yeah, they are. But who'd care what they thought or if they didn't have the state to enforce their silly notions? So people should be, when they're talking to anybody, it's to attack the institution itself, not the Democrats. Of course, they're criminals and idiots. It's the institution of government that's your real enemy. I hope I'm being clear. I think that answers the question too.
Yeah, I think it does. I also think that this climate stuff is going to fade away because for a number of reasons. I think the bubble has been burst on it, and I don't think that that agenda is going to be moving forward. I mean, for one, most of the world has now recognized, certainly the US, all of a sudden with AI, we need more energy. We need to refire up these nuke plants. We need to drill, baby, drill. And even some of the subtle changes you see in the EU around these policies, like that you're seeing a beginning of a shift there, where they're not all about like they're not entire. I mean, they can't change the rhetoric overnight, but even there, I think we'll start to see some openings with it. So yeah, I think it's going to fade away, and everyone will later will wonder what was that climate hysteria all about. I also believe in solar cycles, and I do believe it's going to
Yeah,
get cold, and it's going to be obvious. So
yeah, that makes sense. It's just another, goofy meme that's taken over people. It's like in the 17th century, there are witches everywhere, and everybody really believed it. One girl tells another, and there's witches everywhere. It's the same thing with climate, and it's the same thing with COVID. Okay, God, I hope that, one of the things that the Trumpies are not doing is they're not indicting and prosecuting all these criminals out there. including the COVIDians that foisted that on the world. But, COVID's going to dry up and blow away too.
I can't believe it's still there are any remnants of it still around, Doug. I mean, they're still injecting, 6-month-old babies.
And you still will see the occasional idiot wearing a mask. Uh,
We saw one going to Sao Paulo, one, and it was, some like 30-year-old kind of upmarket woman, you know?
mhm. But
So
but that's good because it's like she's got a little pin on her lapel saying, "I'm a I'm an idiot with dangerous ideas. Stay away from me."
I know.
So
It's funny. It's funny. Okay, well, I think that's all we got for today, Doug. But Michael Yan we've been talking about, he and I have been coordinating him coming back on the show. Is, I think, planning to be here on Wednesday of next week.
that's
So,
good. Michael's a lot of fun to talk to. So I think that'll be a fun conversation. And we'll
yeah.
get boots on the ground news from what's going on in Panama. Although I will pre-warn Michael if he's listening to this now. I think he's, used to be a hot spot. I think it's turned into a backwater.
Well, we'll find out next week what he has to think about that. So,
Uh,
awesome, Doug. Well, you have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, Matt. You too.